is not just a spreadsheet, it is a powerhouse for building stunning dashboards. Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Precious Benjamin here, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to build a stunning visual using Excel. So if you have been following my dashboard tutorials, you'll see that I often use Power BI or Looker Studio for building my dashboards. But today we are going to be doing something different and something hot. We are going to be using Excel for building an interactive sales dashboard. So in this tutorial, we are going to be making use of Power Query in Excel. We are going to be working with Power Pivots. We are going to be working with pivot tables. We are going to be working with pivot charts and a lot of other things on Excel. So like you always know, I always try to make my tutorials as beginner friendly as possible. So even if you're just using Excel to build a dashboard for the first time, you don't have to worry. I'm going to be taking you step by step on how you can build an interactive, stunning dashboard in Excel. I know you're excited to hop in. Well, I'm excited too. But before we hop in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like, and share. Thank you so much for watching. Excel dashboard we are going to be recreating. This is the Excel dashboard we are going to be recreating. Let me make this smaller so it's more visible. But to actually achieve this particular dashboard, we are going to be working with Power Query. We are going to be working with our Power Pivots. And we are also going to be working with our pivot charts and the rest of them. So now this is the data sets we are going to be working with. So I'll be leaving those data sets in the description of this tutorial. So it will be very awesome if you can walk along and build along. Now, to the first thing we have to do is we have to go over to our Excel. So we have to go over to File and we say blank workbook. Okay, now this opens up our Excel. Okay, a blank workbook in our Excel. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to import our data sets, okay, into our Power Query. And to do that, we go over to data and we go over to click here. Let's say we are working with let's say we are working with a text or a CSV file. So this is where we actually get them from. Now, because the data set we are going to be working with is a CSV file, so we just go over to double click on this. Now this opens up our laptop. Okay, now we have to go over to where I actually saved the data set, and as you can see, this is messy cells. Okay, which is the data set we are going to be working with. Then once we select the data set, we hit on imports, and this imports the data set to our Power Query editor. Now, when you look at this is actually a preview of our data sets. Now, as you can see, the delimiter is a comma separated file, okay, a CSV file. Now, as you can see, we have the various columns, okay, and the various rows that we have here, okay. Now, what we have to do is we have to go over to start working on our data cleaning. Okay, now because of we actually have a couple of data cleaning to do, we are not just going to hit on load. Okay, we are going to be hitting on transform. Okay, now when we hit on transform, this takes us to our Power Query editor. All right, now this is our Power Query editor, and we can go ahead to start doing our data cleaning. Right, now when you actually look at this particular, let's start from this customer name column. Now when you look at this customer name column, one thing you will understand here is that the customer names are actually not arranged in a specific order. Now when you look at this, you see that we have John Doe as capital letter all through, then we have Jane Smith as small letters all through, then we also have Jane Smith again as small letters all through, then we have Mike Brown, and we have Alice. So as you can see that all these customer names are not in a standard format. So that means that they are not following the same format. Now the first thing we have to do is go ahead and ensure that these names actually follow the same format. So what I have to do is I have to click on this particular column and let me say transform. Okay, so once we click on transform, I want to ensure that those particular names follow a specific order. Okay, now what I have to do is let me go under format. Okay, now when you click under format, you see uppercase, okay, lowercase, okay, then you see capitalize each word. Now I'm going to click on capitalize each word. Okay, now once I click on capitalize each word, as you can see now, this particular As you can see that these particular columns have not been arranged in a specific order, where John starts with a capital letter, Doe starts with a capital letter. Now we have successfully worked on that. Now let's go over to electronics. Now, when you actually also look at electronics, you will see that the same challenge we actually had with the customer name, okay, column. Now, to actually handle this, what we have to do is we also go on transform data, then we click on formats, then we also say capitalize each word. Now, this actually handles that, okay. Now, let's move ahead. So when we actually move ahead, the next thing you will see here is that we actually have other dates. Okay. Now, when you look at the date column, you see that the date is actually not following a specific format. Okay. As you can see, we have March 15, 2024 here. We have 3rd 14, 2024. Okay. Now, this is not following a specific format, right? Now, we have to ensure that this particular column follows a specific format. Now, how do we do that? Now, the first thing we have to do is let's go over to click on this. Okay, let's right click and say, let's say replace values. Now, let's say replace values. Okay, sorry, not replace values, please. So let's say change type. Okay, we say change type, then we say using locale. Now we say using locale, and we want this to be a date. Then we are going to make use of, let's make use of the US data type, because this US is this because this data set is actually for a US complaint. So we go over to US, United States, okay, then we say okay. Now, when we say okay, you see that this particular row, okay, is actually giving us an error. Now, let's undo this and see why that particular column is giving us an error. Now, when you look at this particular column that was giving us an error, it is showing 17th, 3rd, 2024. Now, when you look at this 17th, one thing you need to notice that there is no month. We don't have any 17th month, okay? We only have from January to December. That means 12 months, okay, in a year. Now, but this is saying 17th, 3rd, 2024. And this is not the appropriate US data type format. Now, because when we actually change this data type, okay, using locale, okay, we actually changed it using the location of the United States of America. Okay. Now, the United States of America, the month comes first, then the dates and the year. Okay. Now, this month is giving us our 17th month, 3rd of 17th month, 2024. And we have no 17th months, we only have 12 months. So, this is why this isn't working. Now, to switch that up, what we have to do is we click on this column, then we right click and say, let's say, let's say replace value. Okay, replace value. Okay, but before we go over to say replace value, let's click on this particular column and this particular row, sorry, and let's copy this. Then we can go back and click and say replace values. Okay, now once we say replace values, we click on this, we paste this here, and we say we want to replace this with pod. Okay, so we say we want to make this 3rd 17th 2024. Okay, now this says March 17th 2024. Then we can actually say okay. All right, now we can go back to say change type using locale and see if that works. So we say change type using locale. Now we can just click on dates and we can go over to say, let's look for United States. Okay, so okay, we say United States and we say okay. Now, as you can see, we have successfully changed that, right? Now let's continue. Now, when you look at this quantity, you see that we actually have null values here. That means we have missing values here. Here we have about 1, 2, 3. Okay, null values. Now, the we one thing we have to do is we can actually drop these rows. Okay, since these rows are not much, we can actually drop these rows, or we can just replace them with 0. Okay, but for the course of this tutorial, I want us to just go over to say replace values, and let's replace null with 0. Okay, then we can go over and say okay. Now this replace all null values with 0. Now we can go ahead. Now when you also look at the unit price, you see that we also have a null value, okay? And we also have minus 400 here, right? Now unit price, what does unit price mean? Unit price simply means the price, okay, for an item. That's what unit price is. The price, the cost price, or how much a particular item is being sold. Okay. And right here now, this unit price for this particular item, electronics, okay, is giving us minus 400. Now, there's no way a unit price will be minus 400. Okay. So this definitely is not a minus, it's just a dash. Okay. But Power BI now is reading it as a negative sign instead of a dash, okay, which is likely to be a typo error. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to go over to say one thing we can do is we can decide to just remove this column, okay, and not make use of this column at all, or we can decide to just remove this dash sign and leave the 400, okay. But before we go ahead to do that, I want us to go ahead to replace null values with 0. So we go ahead to say null, not 0. So once we say that, we say okay. Now we have successfully replaced our null value with 0. Okay. Now the next thing I want us to do is, like I said, we can simply go over to this column and uncheck this. So once we uncheck this actually removes this particular row. Okay, we can simply remove this particular row, or we can simply go ahead and just replace dash 400 with 400, since we already know that the unit price of an item cannot be 0. But for the course of this tutorial, I want us to just replace this with 400. So we go over to replace values, then we go over to do this, then we say 400 and we say okay, right? Now the next thing we have to do is we also have to do the same for this and that. Now when you look at this, it's showing sales. Okay, now this simply means this is the unit price this item costs, okay, and this is the sales, okay, that was made from this particular item. Now, there's no way sales can be minus 1.5 or minus 2.4. Okay, so which simply means that this was also a dash that Power BI is reading as a negative sign. So just like we did for this particular row, we just have to go over to replace values, and we say replace this with 0, and we can say okay, right? Now we do the same for 1500. So we go over here and copy, then we go over to say replace values, then we replace this and we say we are replacing it with 1.5 and we say okay, right? Now let's go over to our sales row. Now, when you look at our sales rep, you will see that the column is properly arranged. Okay, so we have nothing to do right here. So we can simply cancel. Now, let's go over to our order ID. Okay, so when you look at our order ID too, you see that all looks good. So for now, we can say that we have successfully done our data cleaning. Okay, now, but before we actually move ahead, I want us to create another column, okay, that shows our revenue for each row. Okay, so you know that to calculate our revenue, what we have to do is we say units price times quantity. Okay, now to do that, let's go over to move our unit price here. Then to actually do that, we simply hold down our shift key, okay, and also click on we simply hold down our shift key and also click on our quantity. Okay, then we can go over to transform. Okay, then we can simply go over to say add column. Okay, then we can simply go over to say standard, then we can simply go over to say multiply. Okay, now this actually multiplies our unit price by our quantity. Okay, now we can simply move this over here, then we can simply double click on this to rename it revenue. Okay. Now we have simply calculated our revenue column. Now the next thing we have to do before we move ahead is to ensure that all our data type, okay, or all our columns are in their appropriate data type. Now to confirm that, you can see that, okay, 123, which is whole number, other ID is in its appropriate data type, ABC, which is text, customer name is in its appropriate data type. The same thing for products category. Then date is in dates data type, of course. Then unit price is giving us 1.2. Unit price is giving us 1.2. Okay. But when you look at this, you see that this is a whole number and not a decimal number. So we can simply go here and say whole number. Then this one is also giving us a decimal. So we can simply also come here and say whole number. Then we can also come here and say whole number for this. Then we can simply come here and say whole number for this. Okay. Then we can, for this one is in its appropriate data type, which is the sales rep. Then we can go over to say home and we can say close. Okay. Close and load. Now, once we say close and load, as you can see, this actually gives us a proper table in our Excel worksheet. Okay. Now, before we go ahead to start working on calculating our measures, okay, and building our pivot charts, okay, our pivot tables, the first thing we have to do is we have to load this into our model, right? Now to do that, we go over here, okay, then we right click on this and we say load to, and we say we are loading this to our model. So we say add this to data, add this data to data model, then we say okay, right? We say okay. Now this actually, so once we have loaded this to our data model, okay, we can go over to our Power Pivots to start building our measures, okay. And in case we also want to do data modeling, we can also do that in our Power Pivots. But because in this particular tutorial, we are not going to be doing any data modeling, all we are going to be calculating our measures. So what we have to do is we go over to our Power Pivots, okay. Now, once we go over to our Power Pivot, you see add to data model. Okay. Now, this is actually where you do your data modeling. Okay. But this is where we are going to be working with because we want to calculate our KPIs. Okay. Now, to do that, we just click on this and say add a new measure. Now, what measure are we trying to add? As you can see, the table we are working with, of course, is our message sales. Okay. Now, what measure are we trying to calculate? We are trying to calculate our total sales. Okay. Our total sales. Now, to calculate our total sales, we say, of course, sum. Then we look for sales. Then we say, then we close that. Okay. Then we can say number. Okay, we can say number, then or we can say currency, and let's change this to USD. So we click on USD, then we say, let's just say to zero. Okay, zero decimal places, then we say okay. Right now, let's look at the next the next measure we have to calculate is our total revenue. Okay, now to calculate our total revenue, we go back to this. Okay, then we also go back over to our Power Pivots, then we say new measure, and for this we are going to call it total revenue. So we say total revenue, and this will say sum, then we say revenue, then we close this, then we say currency, then we can simply look for US, English US, so dollar United States. Then we can simply say to 0 decimal place. Then we say okay. Now the next thing we have to calculate again is our total quantity. So we go over to measures, then we say new measure, then we say total quantity, right? Total quantity. Then we can simply say some, of course, some quantity. Then we close this. Then we just say this should be number. Then we say 0. Then we say okay. Now, to actually look at the measures we have calculated, all we have to do is go over to our Power Pivots, then we go over to measures, then we say manage measures. Now, as you can see, these are the various measures we have actually calculated. Okay, so in case we want to edit any measure, we can just click on them and edit. Now, for this total revenue, I want us to edit it. So we want to edit the name, so we just say total revenue and we can say okay. Now this edits it to total revenue. Now we can close that. Now we have successfully calculated our KPIs. Okay, we have successfully calculated our KPIs. The next thing we have to do is we have to go over to start building the structure of our dashboard. Okay, so once we build the structure of our dashboard, then we can go over to start calculating or start working with our pivot tables and our pivot charts. Okay, now to build our dashboard structure, what we have to do is we can simply go over to double click on this and let's rename this dashboard, right? Now this is what our dashboard would look like. Now what we have to do is we go over to view. Okay, so I want us to turn off grid lines. I want us to also turn off headings, and I want us to also turn off formula bar. Okay, now this leaves us with a clean dashboard view. Okay, now the first thing we have to do is we go over to insert and let's go over to pick our shape. Okay, so we go over to say insert. We are trying to insert our shape. Now once we click on this, we move this over here, then we can make this smaller. Okay, then we make this can make this way. Okay, so we can make this way, right? Now the next thing we have to do is we have to go over to start formatting this visual. Now to do that, we click on this and we go over to shape formats, then we go over to fill. Okay, now we can go over to white. Okay, make it white. Then we can right click and let's go over to format shape. Now this opens this format shape field here. Now over here we can go over to add shadow. Okay, so we can simply come over here and let's add shadow. Okay, and for this we can simply come over to line and say no line. We don't want to have any line. Now we can decide to make this a bit wider. Okay, then as you can see we are having that fill right here. All right, now the next thing we have to do is achieve the shape and everything we have here. Now to do that, I actually worked with Canva. Okay, so we go over to open up our Canva. So now we have successfully opened up Canva. Okay, now the first thing we are looking at achieving is this lady right here. Okay, now to do that, what we have to do is, but for this lady right here, I wouldn't want to use the image of this lady. Rather, I would want to use my own image. Okay, so when you're also using building those dashboard, you can actually decide to make use of your own image. Okay, now to do that, what I have to do is, now to actually insert my image right there, what we have to do is we go over to insert, then we go over to picture, then we click on this device. So this is the image I want to use at that. So this is the image I want to use. So I'm going to be clicking on it and I'll click on insert. Now this inserts this image right here. Now we have to go ahead to actually make this smaller. Okay. Now we can also right click and we can crop those. Okay. So we can actually eliminate the extra spaces by the side of the images. So we can eliminate the extra spaces by the side of the image. Then we can also click on it, hold the shift key and make smaller. Then we can actually move to that particular side of the dashboard. Now, the next thing we have to achieve is we have to achieve the name, Precious Benjamin, which is my name, and marketing analyst. Now, to do that, we go over to click insert, then we click on our text box, then we just draw a little text right there, then we can say Precious Benjamin. Okay, then we can highlight this and go over to home. Then I want to change this to Canva. If you have been seeing my videos, you will know that I actually like using this particular font. Okay, so I will change this to Canva. Okay, then I want to also make this, okay, I think this is okay 12. Then I want to make this bold, then I can say this is okay. Then I want to copy and paste those. Then I can move this right here. Okay. Then for this, we can make this smaller. Then we can make this smaller. Then I also want to centralize this text. So I go over here and click on centralize and centralized. Okay. Then I can actually go ahead to move this right here. Now, as you can see, this is looking too small, and you see that that it seems like we have a white background just under our text. So I'm going to bring this here. Now I'm going to go over to fill. Okay. Then I will say no fill. Okay. Then I will also say no line. Okay. Then I can simply highlight this and go over to home. And let me say I want to make this 10. Okay. Now let me try pushing this right here. Okay. So even after making it 10, it's still not actually going to. Now I want to make this smaller, and let me try pushing it here again. So what if we decide to make this a bit bigger? Okay. Then we can simply, sorry, move this here, and we can simply leave this here. Right. Now, the next thing we have to achieve is marketing analysts. Marketing analysts. Okay. Then for this, we can simply highlight this and go over to home, and let's make this smaller, and let's make this 9. Okay. So this reads Precious Benjamin, marketing analyst. So of course we can highlight this and go over to home. Now let's take this to the middle, okay, and let's take this to the middle, okay. Now we can simply make this smaller, right? Then we can move over to this, okay. Now the next thing we have to do is, now if you also look at that marketing analyst, you will see that we actually have a white background below the text, okay, and also that line over there. So we don't want that. We are going to get rid of that. And to do that, we go over to say no fill and no line. Okay. Now that removes the background and the line from the text. Now that is actually looking quite okay. Now let's go over to this. So the next thing we have to do is we have to achieve this dashboard here, and we have to achieve the icons and the text. Now, after achieving this part of the dashboard, we achieve here, then we can go over to start working with our pivot tables. Then we can go over to start working with our pivot tables and achieving our visuals. Now, to do that, let me just click on this and let me go over to home and let me make this italic. Right. Now, the next thing we have to do is let's go over to insert and let's go over to shape and let's pick this shape right here. Okay, then let's draw it out, right? Then we can simply resize this to suit what we are working on. Can simply resize this. Now, I think this is looking a bit bigger than what we have there. But however, it doesn't need to look exactly like it. Now, of course, we have to go over to say no line, okay, because we don't really want the line over there around the image. right? Then we can actually leave this right here. So we can go over to insert and let's pick up our text too. Now, what are we trying to insert? We are trying to insert the word dashboard. Okay. So we go over to say dashboard. Okay. Then we can go over to highlight this, go over to home. And of course, I want us to turn that to Canva. Okay. Now for that, I want us to make it 13 or let's make it 14 and I want us to leave it bold. Now we can simply make this smaller, then make this smaller. Then I want us to highlight on it and let's make it white. Okay. Then I want us to click on this and I want us to say no line and no fill. Okay. Then we can then move this right here. Okay. Now that is looking much better. But I feel it's looking too big. So I want to go over to home. Now I want to make that 12. Now I feel that is looking much better. Then I can simply reduce the sizing to this. And I want to move this right here. Okay. And instead of it to say dashboards, I want it to say dashboard. So because this is just a dashboard and not dashboards. Now I feel this is looking okay. Okay. Now let's go over to start working on this text where we have the analytics, customer charts, products, checklist, and logouts. So let's go over to this and we can simply copy and paste those. Then let's move this over here. Then we can highlight, go over to home and remove italics. Then we can also make this, I want to make this 11. Then we can make this bold, can make this longer. Okay. So we can come over here and say analytics. Okay. Then we can copy and paste. Okay. So this is analytics. Then we can come over here and say customer. Okay. Then we move this over here. Then we can come over here and say products. Then we move this over here. Then we can come over here and say, let's look at what else we have there. So we say charts checklist. So let's say charts, right? Then we move this over here. Then let's come over here and say checklists. Okay, checklists. Then let's come over here and say log out. Now this is looking better. Now I want us to highlight this and let's go over to home and let's take this to the right. Okay. The same thing for this. I want us to highlight and let's left align. And the same thing highlight and left align. Then the same thing for this highlight and left align. And the same thing for this highlight and left align. And the same thing for this, of course, highlight and left align. Now this is looking okay. Now we can simply start fixing this text where they belong. So we can move analytics to this, then we can move customers to here. Okay. Then we can move products to down below. Okay. Then we can move charts to down here, right? Then we can move checklists to here. Okay, we are going to work on the alignment later. Then we can move logouts to beneath here, of course. Now the next thing we have to do is start getting the now, the next thing we have to do is we have to start getting our icons. Okay. Now to do that, we go over to Canva. Okay, because I worked with Canva for the icons. Okay. Now the first icon we have to achieve is we go over to elements and we say analytics icon. Now we go over to graphics. Now, analytics icon. So we are going to look for something simple to use. Analytics icon. So we can work with this analytics icon. So we can simply make this big, and let's go over to position center, position below. Then we are going to be downloading this as SVG, okay, not PNG. So we go over to say SVG. Okay, then we go over to say comments page, and we go over to say transparent, and we go over to say download. Now this downloads our SVG. Now to use that, we go over to our Excel and we go over to say insert. Then we go over to say picture, this device, and we go over to click on this and we say insert. Now this inserts our SVG icon. Then we can go over to hold our shift key and try resizing. Now we can also right click and say we want to, okay, let's right click and let's say we want to, I'm trying to crop this to remove the spaces above and beside it. So let's go over to home and see if we can find the crop. Okay, let's go over to home. Okay, so I can't find that, so I can simply just copy this way. So if you copy that way, it's going to look pixelated. So let's just make it small. Okay, let's just think later I'll figure out where to find that crop. Then we can move it right here, right? We can move it right here. Then the next thing we have to do is let's look at our dashboard. Okay, analytics. Okay, now the next thing we have to do is customer, right? So we can actually delete this particular icon and go over to elements and say customer icon. Okay, so we can go over to just choose this. So we just make it large. Now this is looking too big. So we can simply go over to download. Okay, our previous settings has already been saved. So we just say download. Now this downloads that over there. So we go over to our Excel and say insert picture, this device. Then we click on this and we say insert. Now that inserts that there. Then we hold our shift key and resize this. Okay, so we can resize this to look just perfectly as it feels. Then we can move this here, right? Okay, this is looking fair. Now we can go over to products. So let's go over to Canva. So let's delete this and let's say products icon. So we hit the graphics and let's look at product icon. So product icon. So let's look at this. See, looking good. Let's see how this looks. Okay, so let's just make this bold. Then we can go over to share and say download. Okay, and we can go over to our dashboard and say insert this device. Then let's go over to click on this and say okay. Now let's move this here. Then we can go over to make it smaller. Okay, now let's make it smaller to suit what we have been doing. Then we can move this right here. This is looking bigger, so we can make it smaller. Then we move it right there. Now the next thing, of course, is charts. So we go over to here. So we delete this. Now let's call this charts icon. Okay, charts icon. Then let's look for what looks good. Now I feel this is looking fair, not perfect, but fair. Or let's look at, do we have something else? Okay, I think I feel like using this. So I go over to share and go over to download and say download. Then I can go over to my dashboard. Then I say insert. pictures, then I say this device and I click on this and I say insert. Now I can go over to resizing this, making this smaller to suit the size of the vest. Okay, then I can move this right here. Is this looking too big? Okay, let me make it a bit smaller. Okay, now the next thing is checklist. So I go over to this and I remove this and let's say checklists. Okay, now I want to make use of this because we have been using bold icons, so we can make use of something light now. So we go over to download and of course download this, then go over to our inserts and say picture this device and let's click on this and say insert. Now we can go over to hold our shift key and resize this to be smaller, resize this to be smaller, resize this to be smaller, then let's make this smaller. Okay, no, this is looking too small compared to the rest. I think this is looking better here, right? Now the next thing we have to do is go over to log out. Now let's remove this and let's go over to log out. Okay, now go over to log out, then let's use this. Okay, this is looking good to me. So I can go over to say share and let's say download and let's say now we go over to our Excel file and let's say insert and let's say image this device. Then we say insert this. Then we can hold down our shift key and resize this to look smaller. So we resize this to look smaller. Then we can move it over to here that says logout, right? Oh, no, sorry, Control Z. So we can also move this here. Now I want us to move this down here. So it fills this dashboard, right? I want us to move it down here so it fills the dashboard. So we can also move this here. So we move this here, okay, charts. Then let's click on this. Let's click on this. Let's move this here a bit, right? Then we can click on these products and let's move it down here. Okay, then we can move products down here. Okay, then we can move further down here. Then let's click on customer. Okay, let's click on customer. So we can move customer down here. Okay. Oh, let's move customer a bit here. So there are spaces between order. Okay, so products can be moved up. So there are spaces between it. Then charts can be moved over here. So we have spaces between them. So this one can also come over here and we have spaces between them. Now we simply can click on all these icons. Okay, we can click on all these icons. Then let's go over to graphics formats and let's say align to center. Okay, now let's also go over to say distribute horizontally. Okay, or let's say Ctrl Z. Now the next thing we can do is let's click on this and click on analytics and let's go over to align and let's say middle. Now let's also click on this. Let's click on customers and let's say graphics and let's go back to align and say middle. Now we do the same for the rest of the icons. Products, we say align and we say middle. Charts, we say align and we say middle. Then checklist, we say align and we say middle. Okay. Now we can go over to click on all this. right? No, Control Z. So we can move them front a bit. Then we can leave them by there. Now for this, we can also go over to click on this, click on this, click. So you can go over to click on this, hold the shift key, hold down the shift key, then we click on this, click on this, click on this, click on this, then we click on this, then we click on this, then we click on this, we click on this, and let's go over to graphics format and let's say align to center. Okay, now that looks better. Then we can also go over to Ctrl Z that, then we say hold the logout and let's go over to graphics and let's say align, and let's align this to middle. Now this is looking perfect. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to go over to start building our tables. Okay, we have to go over to start building our tables. Now to build our tables, we have to do that using our pivot tables. Okay, now to do that, what we have to do is we go over to our messy data. Okay, then we go over to insert, then we go over to click on insert pivot table and we say okay, right? Then we say okay. Now this creates a pivot table here, right? Now, but this is not what we are going to be working on. So what we have to do is we are going to just leave that there. We are going to be making use of that pivot table, but I will show you for what and why. Okay. Now, what we have to do is let's go over to create a new sheet and let's go over to insert and let's say pivot table and we say okay. Now this inserts a pivot table here. Now, the first pivot table we want to build should be for, we are building a pivot table for sales versus customers. Okay. Now, to do that, we go over to say, let's rename this pivot one. Okay. Or we can simply say sales versus customers. Okay, sales versus customers. Okay, so whichever name you choose to name it is your choice. You can say pivot one or sales by customer. Now to actually visualize this, we have to click on those pivots. Now what are we trying to visualize? We are trying to show sales versus customers where we have a numerical data and a categorical data, right? Now what we have to do is when you click on this, you see all our data, including our including our KPIs. Okay. Now to do this, what we have to do is we go over to drag our customer to our rows. Okay. Then we drag our sales to our values. Okay. Now as you can see, this shows customers and sales. Okay. So we can simply rename these customers. Okay, so you can simply remain these customers, okay, and sum of sales. Now, as you can see, this shows the sum of sales, okay, for each customer. Okay, this shows the sum of sales for each customer. So I want us to show the customers with the highest sales first. Now to do that, I click on my rows, my sales rows, then I right click and say sort. Now let's say sort largest to smallest. Now this shows the customers with the highest sales first. Okay, now to visualize this, all we have to do is click on this. Okay, then we go over to our pivot analyze. Now we go over to our visuals. Okay, our pivot charts. Okay, then as you can see, we have our clustered bar charts here. Okay, now because we want to use the clustered bar charts, we simply say okay. Now as you can see, this shows us our customers and our total sales. Okay, now we can simply go ahead to start customizing this visual. So let's say total sales versus customers. Okay, then we can simply say Michael leads. Okay, Michael leads, right? So we can simply highlight this, go over to home, and let's call this Canberra, right? then we can simply make this 11, right? We can simply make this 11. Now for this, we can simply go over to right click, and let's say I want us to go over to say format chart area. Okay, then I don't want the background below this, so I can simply say no fill and no line, right? No fill and no line. Then I can simply click on this and right click, and I say I don't want to show, let me show data label. Okay, I say I want to show data labels and I don't want to show grid lines. Okay, so I uncheck my grid lines, right? Okay, now that removes the grid lines, and I also don't see the need of a label. Okay, so I uncheck my label, then I uncheck my legend because I see no reason for a legend, right? Now let's look at unchecking as this. No, that so that doesn't look good, so we just leave it at that. Okay, now let's look at error bars. We can add error bars here, then we can add data table, or we can add a trend line. So I want to leave it at this. Okay, now when you go over to chart style, you can simply change the chart style. Okay, you can change the color. Okay, so we can make the color this. Okay, or this. Okay, or but let me leave it at this. Okay, so we can actually keep it over here by the side. Now we have simply achieved that. Now let's go over to our dashboard. Now, the next thing we have to achieve is we have to achieve our sales by. Okay, so this is giving us sales by sales. So this should be sales by sales rep. Okay, so we have to achieve our sales by sales rep. Now, to do that, we go over to this and we click on this. Okay, so we say sales by sales rep. Now, we want to know the sales rep with the highest sales. Okay, so of course, we go over to insert, then we go over to pivot table and we say okay, right? Now this inserts our pivot table right there. Now the next thing we have to do is we click on our pivot table. We are trying to show our sales by sales swap, right? Then we go over to this, then let's move our sales to value, okay? And let's move our sales swap to row. Now sales rep to row. Okay, so we can call this sales rep. Okay, now we can also click on this. We want to see the sales rep with the highest, the so we can also click on this. Okay, we want to see the sales rep with the highest sales first. So we go over to sort and say sort largest to smallest. Okay, now that shows Michael Brown, right? Now the next thing we have to do is we go over to click on this and let's go over to pivot table analyze. Then we go over to say pivot charts. Okay, then we go over to say okay. Now we move this right here. Okay, now we can simply go over to start customizing this. So we can right click and say format chart area. Okay, then we can say no fill, then we can say no line, right? Then the next thing we have to do is we can go over to change color to, let's use this. Okay, let's leave this at that. Then we can go over to uncheck grid lines, right? And we can go over to add our trend line and uncheck legend, right? And we can go over to say sales rep by sales. Okay, so we can go over to highlight this, go over to home, and let's say Canberra. Okay, we can say Canberra, then we can make this 11. Now we have successfully achieved that. Now we can also go over to add another, and let's call this, let's look at what we want to visualize next. So we are trying to say sales by product category. So we say sales by products product category. Okay, then we can go over to say insert and let's say pivot table, and we say okay. Now, because we want to show sales by product category, what we have to do is we can go over here and let's drag product category to row and let's drag sales to value, right? Now we have that. So we can simply call this product category, okay? Okay. Now, when you look at this right now, you will see that we are having electronics, okay? We are having electronics and electronics, okay? Now, which is wrong. Now, we were supposed to actually change the spelling of electronics to electronics, okay? That is why we are having duplicate electronics. Now we have to go ahead and fix that, okay? Now to do that, let's go ahead to our Messi sales data. Now let's right click on this, okay? So we go ahead to our Messi sales data, right? Then we can right click on this and let's go to edit. Right now, this takes us to our Power Query. Okay, this takes us to our Power Query. Now we want to go over to click on electronics. Now we highlight and copy this, and let's go over to say replace values. Okay, now we want to replace this with electronics, right? So we can go over to say okay. Right now that replaces electronics with electronics, right? Now I think that is looking okay. That was looking okay. That was looking okay. Now let's go ahead to say home and let's say close and load. Okay, we say close and load and we wait for that to load up. So since we have actually made changes to in our Power Query editor, okay, the next thing I want us to do before we go ahead is refresh this. Now to refresh, we go over to say refresh all. Now this ensures that all the changes we have made will be updated to our pivot tables. Then we can go over to our so we can move ahead and go back to our sales by products category. As you can see, that has reflected, right? Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to click on this, then we can go over to pivot analyze and then we go over to click on pivot charts. Then we look for our pie charts, okay, and we say okay. Right now this shows our pie charts, okay. Now the next thing we have to do is we go over to here and say show data label. Now we can simply right click and I want to remove the background, so I say no fill and no line, okay. Now we can simply right click and go over to say colors, okay. So we can decide to use this particular color here, okay. Now that is looking okay, then we can move it right here. Now let's go over to our dashboard. Now we have achieved this, we have achieved this, and we have achieved this. But for this, we actually use a different chart. Okay, so we have to go back to change that. Now that should be our sales by sales rep, right? Let's confirm that. That should be sales by sales rep. Okay, so what we have to do is we go over to right click on this, okay, then we can say change chart type. Then I want to change this to this, okay, so I can say okay. Now that looks perfect like what we have there. Now the next thing we have to do, of course, the next thing we have to achieve is our scatter plot, right? Now to do that, what we have to do is we go over to our Excel file, okay. Now I want to show you something. When we go over, let's say we want to add a new sheet here. Now let's call this scatter plot, okay, scatter plots. Now let's say we go over to insert, okay, then we go over to pivot table and we say okay. Now let's say we want to show our sales, okay, we want to show our sales by our unit price, okay. Now, what we do is we drag our sales to values and we drag our unit price to values, right? To values. And let's say we also drag our customer name to rows. Okay. Now, let's say we go over to pivot charts and let's say we click on scatter plots. Okay. Okay, let's check for scatter plots. I think I saw scatter. Okay, now let's click on scatter. As you can see, we will not be able to actually create a scatter plot using this particular method. Why can't we do this? Now, this is simply because of Excel does not support scatter plots directly from pivot charts. Okay, Excel does not support scatter plots directly from pivot charts. So what we have to do is we go ahead to cancel this. Okay, then we can go ahead to right click and let's delete this and say yes. Now, to actually create our scatter plots, what we have to do is we go over to our Messi data. Okay. Now, what are we trying to create a scatter plot for? We are trying to create a scatter plot for our unit price. Okay. Our unit price and our sales, right? Now, we can simply move our sales close to our unit price. So we can simply move our sales. Sorry, I'm trying to move the cells. Okay, we can simply move our cells close to our units price. Okay, now we can click on our cells and our units price. So we can click on our cells and our units price. Okay, then we can go over to insert. Okay, then we can go over to click on scatter plots. So insert scatter plots. Now that way we have successfully inserted our scatter plots. Then we can make this smaller. Okay, we can make this smaller. We can make this smaller. Okay. So we can make this smaller. Okay, we can make this smaller. Then we can simply also right click and let's go over to save format charts. Now I want to turn off no fill and line. Okay. Now for this, we can simply say units price, okay, versus sales, right? Then we can also click on this and let's go to color and let's make this color. Then we can say okay. Now we have successfully created all our charts, right? Now let's go over to our dashboard. But before we go over to start creating our dashboard, like visualizing our KPIs and all, the first thing I want us to do is go over to insert, okay? Then we can insert, sorry. So we can come over here and insert that line right there. Okay, we can insert that line right there. Okay, we can insert that line right there. Then we can right click and say send back. Okay, then we can also, the next thing we can do is we can also click on this, then we say no line. Okay, we say no line. Then we can simply fill with white. Then we can simply go over to shadow and let's fill with this. Okay. Now we have successfully filled with shadow, right? Now the next thing we have to achieve is, let's look at this sales performance dashboard. So we click on our insert and click on text. Now let's say sales performance dashboard. So we call this sales performance dashboard. Okay. Now let's highlight this sales performance dashboard. Let's highlight this and let's make this Canva. Okay. Let's make this Canva and let's make this 16. Okay, now let's make this bold, right? Then we can make this smaller and we can move this right here. Now as you can see, there is a white background below, so we can go over to this and we say no fill, no line. Then we can move this. Okay, this now we can move this right here, right? Now the next we can copy and paste. Okay, sorry, I want to copy and paste this. Then I want to move this here, and for this I will say from June 2025 to September 2025. Then I can highlight this, I can make this 11, I can make this 10. Then I can also unbold this and let me make this smaller. Let me make this smaller and let me move this here. Okay, I move this here. Now this is looking better, right? Now we can go ahead to start building our KPI cards. Now to build our KPI cards, we have three different KPIs. So what we have to do is we go over to insert. Now let's insert shape. Then let's draw the shape for our KPI cards. Okay, so we can make this smaller. Okay, can make this a bit, let's make this a bit longer. Then I can copy and paste this. Okay, then paste this again. Okay, so this shows our three KPI cards, right? Now let's check how that was. Okay, I think that's looking too big, so I can delete this. It's looking too big, so let's make this smaller. Okay, let's make this smaller. Then I can copy and paste. Okay, I can copy and paste. Then I can paste again. Okay, I can paste this again. Then I can hold these three KPI cards and let's say shape formats and let's say align. So let's align to middle. Okay, then we can say align distributes horizontally, and we can also say distribute vertically, right? Now holding these three KPI cards, we can go over to say no line. Then for shape formats, we can make this white. Then we can go over to our presets and let's make this drop shadow. Okay, now the next thing we have to do is let's go over to this. Okay, let's go over to this. All right, now let's say we want to show our, let's call this total sales KPI. Okay, now to show our total sales KPI, what we have to do is we go over to say insert pivot table, we say okay. Now we go over to where we have our KPIs, then we drag our total sales to value. Okay, now this gives us our total sales. Now for this, our total sales now is giving us as $6,300, but when you look here, we are having 48. So that is not a problem. So before we will still go back to our Power Query to know if there was something we did wrong, okay, or if there is something we did not do when doing our data cleaning. Okay, so we'll know if this particular analysis was wrong, okay, if the mistake was from my end, if this particular analysis was wrong, or we just omitted a step during this particular tutorial. But let's go ahead. Now, as you can see, we have actually successfully visualized our total sales, which is giving us as $6,300. Okay, now what we have to do is we have to move our total sales to our dashboard. Okay, we have to move our total sales to our dashboard. Now to do that, you see that this total sales is actually in A2, right? Is actually in A2. Now to move it to our dashboard, we go over to here. Okay, then remember when we were actually customizing our dashboard, we actually turned off some we actually turned off some functions. Okay, so we have to turn on a function. So we go over to view and let's turn on our formula bar. Now we are trying to move our total sales to this particular dashboard. Now remember that we have our total sales in our, sorry, let's go over here. Okay, so remember we have our total sales here, okay, in this sheet called total sales KPI. Now we are trying to move this total sales, right, in A2, okay, from our total sales KPI to our dashboard sheet, okay. Now remember that this is in A2, right, and this sheet is actually called total sales KPI. Now to do that, let's move back. Okay, let's go to dashboard. Okay, then we say this should be equals to, let's say, total, sorry, total sales KPI. Okay, then we are actually making a mistake, so we have to add the string here just after our I. Okay, so okay, now as you can see, that actually shows us 6,300. Okay, now we have to actually link those 6,300 to this particular KPI card. So to do that, we actually click on the KPI card and let's click on this. Okay, let's click on this. Now let's show our grid line. No, not grid line. Let's show our heading. Okay, so now this is D15, right? So this is D15. Now, since we have successfully brought our total sales over here, what we have to do is to move this total sales to our card. Okay, now to do that, we say this is D15, right? So we click on this and say this should be equals to D15. Okay, now so you can see this actually comes over here. So we can actually click on this, okay, and go over to home, and we can turn this to Canberra, of course. Then we can make it large, so we can save 28. So we can move this to the and move this here, then we can bold this. Okay, now this shows our KPI card. Then we can go over to say insert, and let's say insert text, and we can call this total sales. Okay, now we can make this, we can simply make this Canberra also. So we can make this Canberra. Okay, then we can bold this, then we can, okay, so we can simply come over here, right click, and let's say format shape. I want to turn off background and I want to turn off line for this text. So I don't want to make this bold. I want to make this move here. Okay, now this is looking better. Now for this, we can simply move this. Okay, so for this, we can simply move this. Okay, we can move this to just hide it under there, right? Now the next thing we have to do is, of course, we have to show our total revenue. Now to do that, we go over to say, we can go over to click on this. Okay, so we can click on this, click here, and let's go over to say insert, and let's say pivot table, and we say okay, right? Now for this, we can simply go over here and let's move our total revenue to value. Okay, now the next thing we have to do is, of course, this will be E3. Okay, this is E3, right? Now what we have to do, of course, is go over to our dashboard, right? We go over to our dashboard, and we say this should be equals to, right? This should be equals to total sales KPI, total sales KPI. Okay, Then we say E3. Okay. Now let's see. Now that gives us this. Okay. Now also we can simply, this is G15. So we can simply say this should be equals to G15, right? This should be equals to G15. Okay. Now we can simply, of course, style this, and we can call this Canberra. Okay. Then we can call this Canberra 28. Then we can move this to this and move this here. Then we can bold this, right? Then we can click on this and let's copy and paste. Then let's move this over here and let's change this to say total revenue. Okay, total revenue, right? Now this is okay, right? Now for this we can simply click on this and let's move this under this. Now that looks better, right? Now the next thing we have to do is we have to look at our total quantity. Okay. Now to do that, we go over to say insert and we say pivot table. Then we go over to draw our total quantity to values. Okay. That gives us 23. Okay. That gives us 23, right? Now we can go over to, when we look at this is giving us 12, okay, and that's giving us 23. Like I say, we are going to figure out why the values are different, right? So we are going to go back to our Power Query to figure out what we actually did wrong there. But before that, so this is H3, okay? So we go over to our dashboard, okay? Then we click here and we say this should be equals to total, sorry, so this should be equals to total sales KPI. Okay, total sales KPI, and this should be equals to, let's confirm that again. So this should be equals to H. This should be equals to H3. Okay. So let's go back to our dashboard and let's say H3. Okay. Now that's cool, right? So we say H3. So that should be H3. Okay. So that's perfect. Now we can click on this and say this should be, so this is K14. So we can click on this, that this should be equals to K14. Okay. Then that's okay. Now we can customize this. Okay. We can highlight and go over to Canva. Okay. Go over to Canva. Then we can make this 28. Then we can take this to middle, take this down, and let's bold this. Now this is looking better. Okay, this is looking better. Now the next thing we have to do is we click on this and let's move this here. Right now this is looking perfect. Now the next thing we can do is we can start moving our visuals. So to move our visuals, we just copy. Okay, we copy this, go over to our dashboard and paste it. Then we can move this right here. But before we start moving that, let's keep this here. So I want us to copy and paste this. Okay, I want us to copy and paste this. So we can highlight and eliminate this. Okay, so let's see the structure of the dashboard. So we have 2, 3. Now this can be this way. Okay, this can be this way, right? So this was quite small. So I want to copy and paste again. Let's leave this here, right? So I want it to move up a bit. Then, of course, I want to make this a bit bigger, right? Then I want to move this right here. but I have to right click on this and say, and let's say I want to bring it to front. Okay, I want to bring this particular visual to the front. So I right click and say bring to front. Then I can actually click on this and move this here. Now I can actually make this smaller, right? I can make this smaller and to suit what I want it to, where I want it to stay. Then I can make this a bit bigger, okay, longer rather. Now this is making sense this way, right? Now for the next visual, I can say click on this and Control C, then come over to my dashboard and Control V. Okay, then I can also move this and I can decide to make this smaller. So decide to make this smaller. Then I can move this right here. Okay, I can move this right here. So I can also make this a bit bigger, right? So like I said, this is just a very simple visual. Okay, so in the coming weeks, I'll be pushing more complex dashboards on Excel. Okay, more complex dashboards on Excel, but this is just a very simple visual, right? This is also a very simple visual. Then I can make this way. Okay, I can make this way. Now the next thing is I can simply go over to copy and paste this. Okay, sorry, I can simply go over to copy and paste this. So I can move this way, right? So I can move this way. Okay, so this can come this way, right? This can come right here, then this can come right here, then this can come right here. Okay, so I can take this down. So for this, I can simply go over to sales versus customer, sales versus category. Okay, so I can say sales versus product category. Okay, so I can highlight this and let's say Canva, right? Then I can make this 11. Okay, then I can click on this and copy, and let me go over to dashboard and let me paste this here, right? So I can simply make this Control Z this and Control Z this. So I can make this smaller, right? So suits my visual. Control Z this, Control Z this. So I can make this smaller to suit my visual. Okay, so I can make this smaller. So yes, so this is looking quite better. So I can move this right here. Okay, now the next thing I want to achieve is, of course, I have to go over to pick up my scatter plots. Okay, so this is my scatter plot. So I have to click on this. Okay, click on this and copy. And let me go over to my dashboard and say Control V, no Control C. So messy dashboard. So this is should be it. Like this should be it. So I want to click on this and copy this. Let me go back to my dashboard and say control. Let me click here and say Control V. Right? Now I can, sorry, I can move that up. I can move that right here. So I can decide to make this smaller. Right? I can decide to make this smaller, then make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bigger. Okay, so remember we have some figures that are actually different, right? When you look at this dashboard, okay, you see that some figures are quite different. Okay, now I will tell you the reason why that happened. The reason why that happened was when I was building this particular dashboard. Okay, what I did is, when you remember when we are doing our data cleaning, we actually had some rows that had negative values. Okay, where we had the -15 -400. So what I did when I was building this particular dashboard was I removed those rows. Okay, I did not work with those rows. Okay, but I did not work with those rules, so I removed those rules entirely. Okay, that was why we had this particular total sales and total revenue. Okay, but remember that in this tutorial we are working on, I did not remove those rules. I just eliminated their dashes. Okay, and filled them as a positive number. Okay, now this is a major reason for the differences in the figures. So we have come to the end of the tutorial. All right, so don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Okay, like and share, because in the coming week I'm going to be uploading more tutorials. Okay, I'm going to be uploading more tutorials on Excel analysis and dashboard. Thank you so much for watching.